Oh, so let me go to the next. From the Afghanistan Smart Book, the U.S. Army Trade Doc has produced, one of them is they use this idea of Geert Hofstede's 5 dimensions of culture, and they go through these five things: low versus high power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculine versus femininity, low versus high uncertainty avoidance, and long versus short-term orientation. And so they tell you how Afghans and Afghanistan fits into these kinds of ways of thinking. So Afghanistan is a high-power society. Now, Geert Hofstede is a social psychologist based in Holland, and he also has this sort of culture for business, his cultural dimensions here, which I think, I don't actually know this for a fact, but I'm imagining that it's his sort of use of culture in businesses has been sort of pulled and taken into the military's ideas about doing this. And then the next slide after the one describing Geert Hofstede's 5 models is then how it fits into Afghanistan more specifically. And again, it also then gives directives to people, to the people using this, as to what to do with this information. So high power distance, it's critical to identify the power broker of the community, whoever that is, and then deal directly in a positive manner with those in power, which will increase the effectiveness of meetings and negotiations. So it tells you what it is, and then it gives you sort of a take-home how you're supposed to act with that information, which is an improvement on the previous stuff, was just to give you information and not tell you sort of what to do with it. I just discovered this. I'm very excited about it. I can now use Geert Hofstede's, there's a culture GPS, which you can get as an iPhone app, and it can tell you how to interact in different cultures when you're there. So I'm not getting paid for this public service endorsement, by the way. But, while these types and ways of thinking are undoubtedly useful and helpful and are a major improvement from the previous material, they continue somewhat within the national character way of thinking, in which all Afghans, in this case, that the U.S. troops encounter, will all think and act within this particular way. And as an anthropologist, we always like to turn the lens back on ourselves, and I find it very difficult for any of these people who are making this material, and myself, who was not making the material but studying it, to say, well, would I say these exact same things about Americans? Would I think of my people and my culture and my society in these same ways? And I would answer no. And the United States is much larger, obviously, than Afghanistan or Iraq. So even if we limited it to New Yorkers or to Californians, would we say would we put these people into these same categories? And I would say we wouldn't. I don't think we're willing to reduce ourselves to these rigid boundaries and we see ourselves as much more developed and complex. These ways of categorizing behaviors reduce, in this case, Afghans and Afghan behavior to only be about culture, which I think is very problematic. Let me go back to this particular one, where you have, for example, the long-term versus short-term orientation, and it says Afghanistan is a short-term oriented society where saving face, respect for tradition, and immediate stability are important. So when it is only because this is the way Afghan culture is, I think we are leaving behind some really crucial both material and political factors that need to be part of this understanding, and that we should just not tag Afghans as short-term oriented. Afghans have been in some state of civil unrest, foreign occupation, and war since the Soviet invasion in 1979. We need to know that their life expectancy is 44 years, and it has the worst mortality rate for those under the age of 5 in the world, and has an adult literacy rate of 28%. So understanding some of the other factors as to why they might have a short-term outlook just beyond their own culture. For example, there's no stability in their country. Their children die with alarming regularity, and they themselves will be blessed if they live to see their grandchildren, seems essential to being able to not only interact effectively with Afghans in the field, but also to creating successful strategies that address Afghans' needs and concerns. So you might ask, how many people are sort of seeing these and getting these material? I think nobody seems to be willing to put it forward a number that I can find, but I think we have at least 1.5 million U.S. servicemen and women have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so when you look and see here how many, these are, you look, you can't actually see the numbers because I made it black. This actually says how many people have been trained by these various people. And in total, 116,000 have been trained in the intelligence center, and 80,000 have been trained in pre-deployment intelligence. So this is what, and this is since 2004. This is according to the Tradoc Cultural Center. So in total of the 1.5 million plus or minus people that have U.S. Servicemen and women who have served in the Middle East and Afghanistan, they've trained somewhere around 250,000 of them in some sort of cultural training. And there are some of these other programs that are put out. This one is one called Tactical Iraqi. If you've never seen it, it's quite interesting. It trains people in both in language and culture, and it uses the language to specifically train people in culture. And it's like a computer game where you go through as you learn the language to then make the right decisions and say the right things at the right time. I'm sure it's actually very useful. Of course, according to the company that produces it, they've trained 40,000 people to date in all of their programs. But then they also say the president that they've trained 12,000 people in Tactical Iraqi. So I think if the U.S. military's intent is to provide everybody with these kinds of training, they're really going to need to come up to speed and really do it much more intensively, much more quickly. I participated in the Army Tradocs Culture Summit, which was in April of 2010. I participated I talked about my research to them, which was very interesting. Although they all know what I'm talking about, but I think it was much more interesting for me than it was for them. But one of the things that all four branches of the military are talking about as they're preparing these things is that not everybody should be an expert, and you get the little the triangle. The pyramid here, that people are going to be taught in certain things, like what is culture, and then as they go up and as you specialize, you'll get either better language training or regional training as you advance. And so they love PowerPoint. So I have some of their PowerPoint. They gave me some of their PowerPoints. So this is the idea that you go from culture general, where everybody sort of understands culture, to culture specific. As the arrow goes down, you get language and regional expertise as well, as you as a in this case an airman develop your where your deployment, your military, your MOS, and where and you advance. Go back to this. Okay, I have like 5 more minutes. Is that okay? Okay. What does this interest in culture mean, ultimately, and how is culture being utilized as a tool of war? Major General John M. Custer III, the commanding general of the U.S. Army Intelligence Center of Excellence, described this shift as, quote, a tectonic change in military operations because of culture. And so as I've gone through and tried to understand this concern with culture is twofold in my sort of trying to figure it out. One is that the military wants to know others' culture. They want to know the culture of the places that they're going to or where they're stationed. But that they also want to change the U.S. military culture to emphasize that new types of culture are needed and new types of cultural understanding are needed.